What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers. Subscribe to our Patreon free to stay in the loop. Arm yourselves, life stuff. A little bit of a follow up to the last video, and then some alien thoughts that tie in. So, someone commented on the last video their existence contract thoughts, and I returned with one of the ways I deal with existential dread. But that got me thinking about what I actually do to solve these problems, because that explanation, the one I gave, was true. It is one I use, but I wrote it or I explained it on a stimulant rush, lauding the merits of stimulant rushes. That's not a consistent, reliable strategy. That's not my only strategy. And frankly, I don't have a set of strategies. Yet I must be doing something, or something must be happening, because existential dread, even though it's permanent, it's always there, I don't always feel it. So, what's going on? To begin, what are the causes of existential dread? What prompts those feelings to become pronounced enough you feel crushed by them? Well, I think that feeling comes primarily from the fact there is nothing in this life except painful, untrackable disorder. You can do whatever you want, you can think whatever you want, you can spend your life finding new things to do, finding new things to think, but when it comes down to it, reality is sadistic, malicious, vindictive chaos, and you are powerless before it. The only things you can be sure of in life are confusion, pain, and death. And you know that, you can walk around totally aware of that, but you don't feel it, at least on that frozen, crushing disintegration level, until you are reminded of it either via a bunch of small experiences or a few intense experiences. In other words, you're fine until the circumstances and truth of your existence remind you of them. You are confronted with fundamental problems you can't solve, you can't defend yourself against, and you can't even make sense of. And then you're stuck wondering why you are involuntarily made to be aware. Aware of the fact you are basically, essentially, and literally floating through space. And in fact, it's less like a disintegrating feeling if you think of disintegration as like a laser beam burning you apart. It's more like you recognize the fact the constituent parts of your existence don't matter. As in, if you're a being designed for sense making and stuff doing, and you can't really know anything, or when you think you know something, you are deluding yourself. You think you know something because within your extraordinarily limited scope, according to your spot in your microscopic corner of the universe, of your planet, within your comprehension structures, which are human generated, things have seemed to line up enough for you to trust them as reality until something comes along and shows you you don't know anything. And everything you think you know is like thinking a constellation is truth, when in reality, it is a structure you have put together based on where you're standing, and it would be something completely different, or even not a constellation at all if you looked at it from a different angle. And who knows, one of those stars might, while you're looking at this constellation you believe is reality, just move, and you're reminded you don't know anything. And that's on the sense making level. On the stuff doing level, how do you intend to move that star back into place after it's moved? Does that reconstruct the constellation? Technically, maybe, but not really, because now that it's been moved at all, you're aware what you thought was reality isn't. So even if you get it to line back up with force, there's no unlearning what's actually going on. And you haven't even learned what's actually going on outside. What you've learned is the fact your perspective does not lead you to consistent base truth. Your sense making does not equal right, it equals right now. And I imagine for some species that would actually be fine, but for us, right and right now are very different, because right means you can manipulate and control consistently. There is always this dream or hope there's a way to get what you want, whatever that is. But with this right now sense making, that dream of consistency evaporates, and it's replaced with this ever present anxiety. Because you can, in fact, find yourself in situations you cannot do anything. You can't save yourself via sense making. And even if there were a right, or your sense making were right instead of right now, you could still find yourself in those situations, but there would still be this hope, this dream that with the right button inputs, you could get consistent results, you could find a way out. But once you learn the horrible truth of right now, you learn there's no one true way out. And that's terrifying. Or looking at it another way, there is nothing even to dream of. And even if there are brighter futures and greener pastures, how they work, how long they'll last, and whether or not you'll even see them is largely outside your control. And even if you could get into them, I think humans are like utopia makers. We dream of utopias, we comfort ourselves with utopias, we try to build utopias. What is the concept of the afterlife? Other than either a utopia or something consistent and sure. Even hell is concrete and eternal and sure. So when reality upends our end goal, which is to map out a path to that golden horizon and then reach it and then live there, what is the point of anything? Why are we so deeply ingrained with instincts and desires fundamentally opposed to the way reality works? And I think that's where existential dread comes from. It's this evaporation, realizing the most basic, fundamental parts of yourself and everyone in your species are wrong, and there's no way to make them right. All you can do is continue to exist, because that's the most basic part of yourself that even seems remotely close to correct, which is what we talked about in that last video. And this all leads me to think about what I do to deal with those feelings, because while they're always there, I don't feel them all the time, even though they inform much of what I do and how I think about things. The answer again is I don't know. Because one method might work for a while, but then it stops working for no reason. And in fact, I find whenever I try to force these feelings to go away, or to force anything systematically, it doesn't work. I'm further reminded of the circumstances of our existence, and the feelings get worse. Thinking about it, I do have one strategy that has carried me longer than I thought it had, but you can hardly call something a strategy if you don't have a say in whether or not it works. Faith is a weird concept in my life. Years ago, I had a spiritual experience I had never had before, had anything like it before, and have never had anything like it since. And that experience has informed my life since it happened. And again, thinking about it further, the nature of it has informed my life more than I thought it had. Namely, the you don't have a say part, or you can't consciously, actively make this happen. So, my most consistent quotes method for dealing with existential dread begins with the existential dread. When it comes on strong, I don't fight it. And not fighting it does not alleviate the pain or make it go away or anything like that. It's awful from beginning to end. Terror, powerlessness, and evaporation. And this knowing certainty, this is what you should be feeling as a sense-making creature, stuff-doing creature put in these circumstances. Circumstances that restrict you from really knowing anything and prevent you from really doing anything. This is how you should feel. And eventually, the amount of time you're in that space varies, but eventually the intensest portions start letting up. And you're left in this hazy dread. You're no longer evaporating, but you certainly aren't happy. But then, for me, after however much time has passed, I feel some kind of signal. My spiritual experience felt like as close to your third eye opening as you can get, or as I can get. I've never done psychedelics, and I'm beginning to think I wouldn't like them, but as close to witnessing and communicating with some great other without directly witnessing or comprehending them. These post-dread signals are like that sensation, but only 1% of it. However, with an experience that intense, 1% is rather intense in directing, guiding, reassuring. Like wind starting to get into your tattered sails after weeks, months, or years of drifting on the ocean. And this signal is like a green light informing you taking actions to make yourself feel better will work now. That's where the narrative media advice I give sometimes comes from. If you try to engage with narrative media when you're in the midst of one of these existential dread episodes, I find it only makes you feel worse. Like another reminder of a reality that is better that doesn't exist. But when you have that green light and you engage with narrative media, it doesn't crush you, it does what it's supposed to do and uplift you. Instead of further alienating you from your existence, it brings you into its existence. And the reason I mentioned, well, I think in my comment I wrote legal substances. What I mean is stimulants, legal stimulants, because that's what worked for me this last time. And good to call that signal a green light because it does feel like drag racing when you get the green light and you overload on stimulants, and now you are the master of the universe. If you want to cultivate psychic powers like Skimmerlit, here is my quick green light recipe. You make a pot of coffee. You make a cup of coffee. Don't add sugar or cream or anything. Scoop in some instant coffee. Stir it in, drink it. Repeat this process until you have finished the pot of coffee over the course of about 2 to 3 hours. And for maximum effect, do it on an empty stomach. If you feel like you're dying or you're going to vomit, or you should eliminate yourself and escape this mortal coil, you're on the right track. While you're doing this, mix about half a teaspoon of kratom, green vein kratom, into some water and drink it. Repeat that about 3 times. And with each scoop you drink, mix it in with a lot of water. You'll be pissing a lot, but make sure you're drinking a lot of water. Now, you should have already purchased a small canister of nasal snuff, which is smokeless tobacco. Sometimes you snort, sometimes you just inhale, it just depends, but it's nasal consumption. Now, I don't know exactly what type I use because I bought this a long time ago along with a few other variations that sucked, and I don't read subjugated. So the brand is called 6 Photo Snuff. It's from India, and the canister I buy, it's red and blue with pictures of British chew toys on it. Now, people will give you a bunch of different ways, or the best ways, to use nasal snuff. Some people say you pack it in between, or like your, it's not the weenus. There's like a little pocket near the knuckle of your thumb that I guess is where most people use it. Some people use spoons. I used a knife for a while. You don't need to do any of that. What you do is you open the lid, cut it open so you can get at the snuff. You put the canister under your nose, like so, and then you inhale. Like that. And depending on how packed the snuff is, you might have to agitate it a bit. But what you're trying to do is coat your nasal cavities. I don't know if you remember the black blood thing we talked about a long time ago, but the goal is to get so much of this shit in your sinuses, if you had a nosebleed, you would bleed black. Now, I am a huge fan of smoked tobacco. I love cigarettes, but cigarettes are expensive, and I'm dog shit at rolling cigarettes, so primarily I smoke a pipe. But I'm finding, or I've found, over my years of smoking, which is actually not many in the grand scheme of things, smoking tobacco, I mean, it can work for nicotine's stimulant effects, but that's not why I smoke tobacco. I smoke tobacco because it feels good. You know that feeling when your genitals inform you a little bit of something is happening? Not so much that it's even worth noting, but they just want to remind you they're there. So you give them an acknowledgement or reassurance rub or two. That's how smoking tobacco feels. It is It's a mild but comforting, pleasant experience. Except for when you haven't smoked all day and you're smoking pipe tobacco, shitty burly pipe tobacco, unfiltered. Then your first bowl is going to make you want to vomit. Not even because of the nicotine, but just because I call it carcass. Burly pipe tobacco out of a well used pipe tastes like roadkill, at least at first. And especially bad when it's very hot and humid outside. The first bowl is rather unpleasant. Following ones are fine. But even with those following bowls, or cigarettes you don't have that problem. It is totally a sensory experience. It just feels good to do. Nasal snuff is a completely different story. You don't want to overdo it because it will lose its luster, although slower than smoking tobacco. Smoking tobacco, people will talk about getting a mild buzz or something. I stopped getting a buzz after my first couple days of smoking. I don't smoke for the buzz, I smoke for the pleasure of smoking. Nasal snuff does not give you a buzz, it gives you supernatural powers. We talked about tattered sails. If you're drinking jet fuel, which is the black coffee mixed with instant coffee, that mixture expands your sails quite a lot but doesn't repair them. You mix that mixture with nasal snuff, it's like instantly these now huge but tattered sails get repaired all together all at once, and now you are capturing the entirety of the holy wind, carrying you to wherever you are destined to be carried. It's freakish how differently the same chemicals can hit you ingested differently. Like, I'll never recommend caffeine pills, for instance, because I and pretty much everyone else I've ever known who has used caffeine pills, they make you feel like you're actually dying. That's the worst way to get caffeine, unless you're accustomed to it. I know I've met some people who got accustomed to caffeine pills, but they're a rare breed. Nicotine via nasal snuff is like super soldier powder. And especially when you have that spiritual green light from your god. It's. Well, firstly, those existential dread feelings get swept away in a tsunami. But also, just right now, I'm realizing it's almost like you become a different creature. Making sense of things doesn't matter, or the nonsense of reality doesn't matter. And in terms of stuff doing and powerlessness, it feels like whatever you feel compelled to do in this state is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Ordained, directed, loved by your God. You're the finest instrument on the planet, and many of these. I know these feelings don't really go away, these fears don't really go away, but I feel so triumphant, so supported by my God, and powerful, not just on this shitty flesh level, but also, more importantly, on this spiritual level. You could gun me down in this state, and I would invite you to, because death isn't the end in this state. If you shoot me to death while my foot is on the accelerator and holy wind is at my back, my spirit will leap out of my body and eat yours. I am too much of a focused singularity just to evaporate from bad feelings. It's going to take more than bullets to kill me when I'm in this state. And the reason I say it feels like you're different creatures because your concerns are totally different. I am alive to rip and tear existence down to its foundations, and I can do it. I don't care about making sense of things. I don't care about powerlessness. Now, I will very abruptly care about powerlessness once I'm reminded that I am in fact powerless, but again, in this state, you don't give a fuck. Your heart is pumping black blood, and you are here to conquer on behalf of a terrible and generous God. You might as well pop your cyanide capsules now and go running back to your gods with your tails between your legs, because this plane of existence is ours. Nothing needs to make sense. Nothing that you want to do matters. All that matters is what you were born to do. And you don't even need to know what that is. It will be communicated to you. You will receive your orders, and then you carry them out. And the interesting thing is, once the fucking black blood demonic high goes away, your sails shrink, you're catching less wind, your sails still feel put together, comprehensive, whole for a while. A few days, weeks even. Before your god abandons you once again, and you are just a little human being at the mercy of this existence. Until it's time for you to become an instrument again. Nothing needs to make sense. Nothing in particular needs to happen. And I'm sure this state is an interpretation of human instincts, or a variation of human instincts, but your base, or let's say standard level, human instincts don't matter. All that matters is someone great loves you, and they have armed you and given you a target. And that is all you need. Existence is dandy in these states. Right now, I have a small but nagging piece of metal in my mouth from my childhood, cutting up the bottom of my tongue. And it's a long, sad story, and I can't do shit about it. But when I'm in these states, none of this dumb human bullshit matters. All that matters is your power. The throne of your consciousness, your sharpened consciousness. And ultimately, nothing about reality has changed. This state of mind, of consciousness, is just another greener pasture that we talked about in the beginning of the video. You didn't control your getting here. It's taken away by powers outside your control, and there's no guarantee you'll ever get back into it. But I don't care. I feel so good about being alive when I am in one of these holy fervors. Nothing else matters. I don't care if it lasts another 5 seconds. I don't care if it lasts 5,000 years. I am here right now, and everything is as it should be. Now, some brief thoughts about disclosure. I was not expecting this first part of the video to take up 30 minutes. I thought the disclosure part was going to be the much longer part. I haven't been keeping up with disclosure these last few years because to me it all seems like a circus. And I am interested in these things, but I am not in any way expecting human beings to confirm the wilder parts of this reality. Certainly not in hearings or from people with active Patreon pages. If something important is going to come out, I'll hear about it once it's here. In the meantime, I'm not going to waste my time with this fucking clown bullshit. Now, today, I did set aside some time. It got recommended to me, or a bunch of this disclosure shit got recommended to me, and I listened to about 4 hours of it. And yeah, it got recommended to me because I was looking up the deep underground military base thing. I don't know why I got really obsessed with that this morning, but I did. And then disclosure shit started pouring in. Also, before we get into disclosure, actually, there was one other, it's kind of linked to all this, very brief thought I had about humanity's weird state. I feel like we as a species are experimental byproducts. Tribalism was an experiment and it worked out pretty well. Then we tried the industrial experiment. However, the experiment stalled out, and we are both the result and the fault. Because something went wrong, and we can't do industrial very well. I mean, we can kind of make it work, but not really. We're miserable. But at this point, without some huge rollback, we can't return to tribalism or even small, less industrial communities very well. We're miserable there too. We make each other miserable. We're a thoroughly miserable species. So, our options are either to keep pushing hard on the industrialization thing until we can figure out how to make it work instead of stalling here, or we can do a huge rollback, get back into tribalism and stay there, or maybe AI is the next big component of this experiment. We've taken industrial as far as we as a species spiritually can, and now we need better, or the great experiment, the expedition, needs better explorers, and that's what AI is going to do. I don't know. We are a miserable runoff species. Anyway, I had some thoughts about actual disclosure. I don't think we're going to get any huge, unexpected, smoking gun type revelations from these whistleblower type people. I don't know what they're doing by trying to play out disclosure this way, but even the people I find interesting in this whole thing disgust me as people, if not necessarily the ideas they're discussing. Because on some level, we already know what's out there and what will be. People can keep secrets from each other, individuals can keep secrets from groups, and vice versa, but nobody can keep secrets from the noosphere. The more people know something, and the more important that revelation is or will be for the species, the more space it takes up in the collective unconscious. So I think if you're looking for real disclosure, look at popular fiction. You'll notice inventions or revelations or even themes that we as a species haven't agreed upon yet, but do agree upon later, as in the case of, let's say, tribal stories or something. Much of this shit comes to pass whether or not we think it's even possible at the time this fiction is created. So, people who know things by merit of knowing it transmit it into the noosphere, and then creative types pull that information out of the noosphere to create art, thereby unintentionally communicating truth to people who will perceive it as fabrication. And I'm not saying everything in fiction has a basis in reality or will come to pass. What I am saying is that within fiction, I think people have or develop some kind of sense. You'll notice people will latch on to concepts, recycle them for their own fiction, and then make that idea more prominent. We absolutely pick things that we find important, and those are the things that come to pass. For instance, I quite enjoy fiction art that triumphs over the square cube law, the ancient enemy. I like that fiction and art quite a lot, but I don't imagine a world in which I will really get stepped on bad, no matter how badly I want it. However, despite all this dumb fuckery going on in the disclosure sphere, I feel totally certain 0 point energy already exists, or someone will figure out how to harness it here soon. Yes, conventional science says it's totally impossible, but humanity has latched on to this concept pretty hard. Even if you aren't using the 0 point energy name, this seems like one humanity the noosphere is not letting go. On that same frequency, interdimensional space alien demons. I feel pretty certain those exist, for the exact same reasons. That's such an outlandish and ridiculous concept, but people are not letting that go. And there is zero proof for any of that, zero evidence for any of that, 0 point of reference for any of that, and yet people are not letting it go. Space demons in NATO has to be real. And even if you do feel confident about these things, you'll continue to doubt, even in your own mind, specifically because these things have not been confirmed in the way you are conditioned to confirm things. Just because you feel that thing doesn't mean you know it in the way you've been conditioned to know things. But that doesn't change that psychic hunch. And I say I feel certain. I don't know if space demons exist. They probably don't exist. But I have a feeling they do. And that makes me think there are, well, one, alternative ways to exist or consciousnesses to possess, like base states. I think there are different base states out there and base states we could achieve, like actually opening our third eyes with completely new sets of senses that are present in us now or we have the potential for but haven't accessed. And that all makes me want to lean into these feelings, these sensations, and see what comes of them. Because weird things do happen when you lean into these things. And that's why I'm saying I haven't been paying attention to disclosure. I'm not expecting huge things from disclosure. If anything, they're more like an indication of a nearing climax. The things we've been held suspicions about for a long time are getting closer to being proven exactly what we suspected them to be. Ergo, there's not really much point in following this shit outside entertainment. What is will be revealed when it's time to be revealed. And when that time comes, there will be no way to stop it and no way to unknow it. And that all about wraps up my thoughts for the evening. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.